Psychology in Seattle.
Hey, Deserving listeners. Today, we're going to answer your emails. Let's get into it. Umberto, what do you say?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I am looking for Bigfoot prints.
This first email is from an anonymous patron, and they write, I just listened to your most recent episode where listener Colin describes an experience he had dating. So this is the episode we did on ghosting.
Yep.
What really resonated with me was the sonnet that he sent the guy. So just chiming in here, Colin really fell head over heels for someone that he started dating, and it seemed like it was mutual. And Colin and this fella were spending a lot of time together and talking about how they're glad they finally met the right person for them. And then Colin wrote this sonnet for him, and then that seemed to kind of either coincide or be a factor in this other fella saying to Colin that he wasn't really interested in him. And Colin was really hurt by that.
Right.
And so anyway, what really resonated with me was the sonnet that Colin sent the guy. You suggested that maybe he sent the sonnet as a way of making sure he wasn't going to lose the guy and that he was reacting to past trauma. This is 100% me. I've only had a couple of dating experiences in my life, and both of them have turned out similarly to Colin's.
Oh, wow.
If I'm dating a girl and it becomes clear that she's interested in me, a mild refrigerator hum of anxiety immediately starts. The anxiety gets worse if I text her and it takes a while for her to respond, which is then followed by an undeniable relief when she finally does respond. The cycle continues for the remainder of the relationship, which usually doesn't last long. I can only imagine that I'm coming off hostile, awkward, intense, or pressuring to these women. I can't pinpoint specific behaviors, but I have to assume I'm coming off like that at some point. I'm very aware of this anxiety while it's happening, and I'm aware of how irrational it is, but my body and my feelings take over in these moments no matter how hard I try to act normal. I'm in therapy addressing past traumas. My therapist has suggested that in the future, I just be honest about these feelings to whomever I'm dating. But should I? It seems like a lot to put on somebody while in the initial phases of dating. Should I even be dating at this point? Is this something that can even be fixed? Just wanted your opinion, Humberto.
Wow, yeah. First of all, I can relate on some fronts, like, for example, and I think a lot of people must be able to relate. You start a new relationship, and there is that push-pull, like, how much do I communicate? How soon do I communicate? What do I say? For some people, these things, I think, come more automatic, maybe because they've been more practiced or just their personality type, whatever. I know for me, I second guess a lot of things all the time. You know, I'm always in my head thinking through things. And when I'm thinking through things in my head, it usually goes something like, well, should I comment about this thing that they mentioned? Because if I comment about that, that might seem like I'm too interested. But if I don't comment, it seems like, and all those kinds of thoughts, I think they're natural. However, there is a part where if it becomes this level of anxiety where you're just kind of like sabotaging yourself, and there's that movie Swingers, right, where Jon Favreau is sitting there and he leaves a message for the girl that he's broken up with, but then the message gets cut off, or it's a girl he just met or something like that. The message gets cut off, and he's like, oh. So he calls back. He's like, I'm sorry, the message got cut off. So I meant to say, and then it just becomes like a series of 15 messages, obviously ruining the chances for the relationship. And that is an extreme. What I'm wondering is, what is the experience of that situation of waiting for a response, fearing that the response may never come, and then that endorphin release when it comes? That feels like almost like addictive behavior, right? Like I've experienced it. I think it's not uncommon. There's even a whole thing about you can't leave me on, what is it? Like, don't leave someone on red. That's what people say. You left me on red, meaning that the last message says that it was read, but you never replied. And that's a big thing. I think people in general experience this anxiety. So how would one navigate that anxiety and maybe, cope with it? What do you think?
Yeah, well, people experience that anxiety to varying degrees. Everyone experiences, I guess, that anxiety sometimes, depending on the circumstance. But given some people's relational traumas, like what this person is talking about, then they're much more likely to have an exaggerated feeling in that way. When we are abandoned growing up, when we're not nurtured enough growing up, when we're criticized too much growing up or something, we have this, we haven't had our tank filled up adequately with love and attention, and we feel that deficit. And when we finally meet someone who might be able to fill it, a lot of our attention gets placed on that. And when they fail to fill it as fast as we hope that they do, then it just reminds us of all that pain that we've never been able to get it. And we experience a lot of anxiety. So, I think that should be pointed out. But how does one deal with it? Colin's doing all the things that he should be doing. One is to remind himself that it's irrational to get that way, because your feelings are going to come. You have those relational traumas. It's going to trigger those feelings. But you have to push back cognitively at the very least. You're not going to succeed in getting rid of the feeling, but at the very least, you're not going to go along with it consciously. It's sort of like thinking, what's an analogy? I was thinking of a carjacking, but that's not a very good analogy. It'd sort of be like you're at a PTA meeting and a very vocal, weird group is screaming at the PTA meeting. And they're like, "We want you to ban Huck Finn," or something. And you're on the other side of the room and you're just like, I don't agree with that. In fact, I don't think most of us agree with that. Well, if you just remain quiet, well, that vocal minority of weirdos is going to take over. So you got to speak up.
Yeah.
Now, you're not going to change their mind.
Right.
You're not going to change those, 13 people's mind that Huck Finn needs to go away. But you can balance the equation a little bit. So at the very least, the leadership understands that not everyone agrees with them. So you have to push back and you have to say, okay, I feel this feeling of panic right now, but that's related to my past traumas and is not commensurate with what's happening right now. Plus, if things don't work out with this person, it's not the end of the world, even though it kind of feels like it's going to be. But I have to at least tell myself it's not the end of the world. That's not going to take away your feelings, but at least they're not running the show. The other thing that you're doing, Colin, is you're in therapy and you're healing from those past traumas. The other thing that your therapist is suggesting you do, which I actually second, is that to be honest about it. Now, you might be, maybe you're unclear as to how to be honest about it. It's like, and your question is valid. You're like, well, isn't that a lot to lay on someone in the first, couple of dates? Well, you don't lay it all on them, but you tell them, like you're, it's date 3 or something. And you say something like this. You say something like, look, I just want to tell you something. And, you don't have to respond. Don't worry about having to respond. But, we've had 3 dates and, I like you. My conscious mind is telling me that, who knows if things will work out between the two of us. I'd like to see us go to a few more dates and see where this goes. And I really like you. And I think this, who knows, maybe this will work out. Maybe it won't, but that's where I'm coming from. The other thing I want to tell you is that, my mom abandoned me a lot when I was a kid, which has led me to be kind of anxious about people abandoning me. I have that kind of issue. And although I'm in therapy and I sort of have it under control for the most part, sometimes what it does to me is that like if I text you and you don't text me back right away, which is totally fine with me, by the way, sometimes it triggers this abandonment feeling in me. And I sort of wrestle with myself where I'm getting worried, but then my, higher mind is going like, well, no, everything's fine. And so sometimes I'm going to pre-apologize to you because I might actually come across like I'm upset at you or something for not texting me back right away, because text is sometimes hard to communicate effectively. And I just want to apologize in advance for that, because it's an issue of mine that I've done in the past, and I don't want to do it again with anyone, let alone you. And if I ever do that, never feel bad about yourself, because that's just my issue. And by all means, if you want to tell me to fuck off, please do so. I never want to put you in a position where you feel like you're pressured or anything like that, because that's not the way anyone should live.
So, would you like more water? Have you noticed that your date is no longer sitting here? So I do wonder, actually, the balance between being that honest, how soon, and whether or not the attitude should be, well, if they can't handle this, then it's okay, because it just means that we're just not going to work anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, if someone likes you, then and they're halfway fucking mature.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing, like when you start dating when you're like 35 or something, you realize like, oh, I have to acknowledge that I have issues and you have issues. It's sort of a trope, it's like, oh, we're dating at 40 years old. Everyone's got baggage. Well, people have more baggage when they're 20. They just are so narcissistic and immature that they can't acknowledge that they have the baggage.
Right.
So if someone's going to run away from you from that, then fuck them. If they can't handle a conversation like that, the way I put it forward was, this is not your fault.
Yeah.
This is an issue of mine I'm working on. I'm mature enough to work on it. And I'd love to talk about things in a real, honest way.
Right.
If someone runs away from you with that, then fuck that. And in my experience, nobody runs away from that, because it's a breath of fresh air from the games that people play that they don't want to involve in. So that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, I also think I've said this before. So one aspect is, when I was a kid, I think in 8th grade, maybe 9th grade. Yeah, 9th grade. There was this girl that I really liked, and she lived not close to me, but she lived close to my cousin. And I was talking to her, and I was so into her. I couldn't tell if she was into me or not. And I'm like, what's going on this weekend? Are you going to be around? She's like, no, I'm actually going to be at this jamboree. Like, what's a jamboree? Oh, like I'm a Girl Scout, and there's going to be this huge jamboree thing. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that whole weekend, I was obsessed. I was with my buddy, and I kept thinking, oh my gosh, I wonder if I should try to go to that jamboree and like show up. And like, first of all, I had no idea what this jamboree was. I had no way to get there at all. I couldn't even imagine what would have happened if I randomly show up at some jamboree and they're like, excuse me, what do you need? Oh, I need to get in here. Why? There's this girl I like, and I just want to go say something. What are you going to say? Like, what? I can't even imagine. But in my head, it was all being like thought through. I'm like, maybe I should just go tell her how I feel, blah, 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 right? These grandiose gestures from movies. Well, when, she finally returned from the jamboree, and I left like 3 messages at her house, like for when she returned from the jamboree. That thing went nowhere, it's like it crashed and burned immediately. And all that obsession, all that thinking and rethinking and overthinking it felt inevitable. It's like something that I couldn't really control. So what comes to mind is, if I had been busy with my own thing, it would have been a little harder for me to just obsess about it, right? But instead, that weekend I was kind of like doing nothing, just hanging out with my friend. We had no plans or anything. So one thing that I always think is busy yourself. Like, busy yourself not just with like literally just busy work, but have plans, have things you want to do, take classes, go on tours, go take trips, take adventures.
Well, have a hobby.
Have a hobby. Because what ends up happening is 2 things. One is you end up being actually less available for just ruminating, because you're actually busy doing stuff, number 1. It's not perfect, but it helps. Number 2, you meet people. Number 3, when you meet people, you have things to talk about because you actually are doing things, and there's things that you're into and things. Yeah. And you also can, start discriminating what you actually want to spend your time doing and not doing.
Unless your hobby is sharpening knives and cutting up stuffed animals.
Well, okay. That could be a neat thing. You could make YouTube videos about it and stuff. But anyways, my general point is that, and this is going to sound trite, and I don't mean disrespect to this listener or anyone else, it's just have a life. And I don't mean get a life. I just mean really have a life of things you want to be doing and make that the primary thing and make having a relationship the secondary thing.
Yeah, that's good advice. So the final thing that you ask here is, should you even be dating at this point? The question is up to you. It's fine to be dating at this point. Worst case scenario, you scare people away.
Yeah.
There are worse things in life. The likelihood that the next 5 people you date are going to work out is pretty slim. So you might as well just admit that to yourself and be fine with it. Is this something that can even be fixed? Absolutely. With corrective experiences with your therapist and other people, you will begin to feel more secure, securely attached, and less anxious when you are facing insecurity with other people. So this next email is from patron Phil. Phil sent this article in about why we play video games. He's very interested in the reasons why people play video games. And at first I was like, well, let's look at this article. And then I looked into it and I was like, whoa, there's this one study where they looked at so many different reasons why people play video games, and they tried to rank them from the most frequently given reason to the least frequently given reason. So I want to read all of them actually, because I think that is sort of interesting. And if any of these sort of jump out, there's a lot. So,
okay.
But if any of these particularly jump out at you,
Okay. Like reasons why I do it kind of thing.
Right.
Okay.
So this first category is called accomplishment. So people play video games for accomplishment reasons. And again, not just first-person shooters, but also, Angry Birds and phone games and, all the video games, Minesweeper.
Right.
Accomplishment. Artistic accomplishment, meaning it conveys a message expressing the author's vision to induce an interpretation. Oh, so you're like interpreting the artistic vision of the artist.
Okay.
Challenge, a physical challenge, so a test of physical skills.
Yeah. I can relate to that one.
How so?
Especially with the first-person shooters.
No, but this is a physical, actually your physical, this isn't coordination of your hands. This is physical, like a Wii or
never mind.
Yeah. Challenge intellectual, testing your mental skills.
Well, there better be a category for physical hand-eye coordination.
Believe me, it's all in there.
Yeah, mental, yes. I relate to mental, for sure.
Spending, real money spending.
No.
Enrichment, teaching you things, facilitate learning.
Not much.
Earnings, real money gain.
Nope.
Progression markers like gain levels, character levels.
Yeah, totally.
Recognition, ways to be known by the public.
No.
Reincarnation, possible to live someone else's life and work. Soul searching, health, good for your health. Find in real life love partner. Find sex partner. IRL consequences.
No.
Okay, next is, I don't know why that's all accomplishment. It doesn't make any sense.
Those were all accomplishment?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm just going to read because I think the umbrella category. Exploits, meaning epic feats achieve exploits and great things. Completion.
Yeah, I like completion.
Yeah, I like that too. Difference, the originality of the game.
Yeah.
Exploration, to visit places,
Yes,
landscapes.
I like that.
Goodies around the game, real products, figurines, cards. Story, advanced storyline. History, to learn history. I do it for that.
A little bit with the war games, a little bit. Age of Empires.
Yeah. Immersion, distinctive atmosphere, fan service, casting with celebrities, incarnation, possibility to embody someone or something else, to focus on the pragmatic part of a role, like I don't know, veracity, presents transcripts of real historical events, adrenaline, fast rhythm explosives, Relaxation, for sure, that's for me. Sexual arousal. You don't play any sexually arousing games.
No, except Leisure Suit Larry.
Did you actually play that game?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I played 1, 2, 3, I think 4.
It's funny because my friend who had a PC or Apple or something,
Yeah.
he was begging, and we were probably like in the 5th grade. He was begging his parents to let him buy Leisure Suit Larry, but we were like, we're never going to get that game. That's ridiculous.
I never owned it. I always played it at other people's houses. I wouldn't have. Well, I don't know. I just didn't have a PC that could run it, I guess.
To experience joy, positive thoughts, sure. Freedom of movement and action.
Yeah.
Nostalgia, memories of things that happened in the past. I mean, maybe. Oblivion helps you forget about the hustle and bustle of daily life. Absolutely for me. Fear, like being like horror
I
games.
played some of those.
I don't like those games.
I don't like it.
Laugh, aimed at making you laugh. Yeah. I mean, like there was the South Park game, which I
I love that game.
I laughed at, but I don't know, it didn't hold me. Ravaging, like trolling possibly to bore others, to stand in their way, to provoke them. Control, bend the environment to your will, convey your skills. Yeah. Submission, very controlled environment, rules well laid out. Corridor game, scripts. Yeah. Astonishment, you want to be astonished. Tranquility, instill zen.
I've played a couple of games like that. Flower.
Solitude, play solo, unsolicited by outside events. I'm definitely like that. I like solitaire games. I
tend to prefer solitaire as well.
I almost hate PvP games. So I'll just rattle through: experimentation, gameplay, lots of gameplay, sort of innovation, fairness, ease, time spending, stability, repetition, graphics, sound, touch, movement.
Yes, graphics, sound, touch, movement.
Competition, cooperation. I love co-op games.
I love co-ops.
Family, couples, friends. Okay, so when you look at the research, and they ask people the 10 most frequently said reasons as to why, motivations for why people play video games. The number one was immersion. So a distinctive atmosphere, polished, coherent, immersive.
Okay.
Second is gameplay diversity, rich gameplay with numerous mechanics, preventing routine. Rich gameplay with numerous mechanics. Yeah, I certainly play games like that, like strategy games.
I wonder if this is how people answered, or these are the gestalts of how people answered. You know what I mean? Because that seems like I don't see the average person answering like, I prefer an immersive environment.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
The language of this study is really kind of weird.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if they coded anyway, but I think they actually said yes to this item.
Weird.
3 is history, to relive
Really?
or anticipate history. It says. 4 is freedom of movement and action, lenient environment, none or very few restrictions. And by the way, these are both the United States and Europe and South America people. Exploits, gameplay depth, the depth of gameplay, difference, oblivion, which I can definitely relate to, help forget about the hustle bustle of life. The least cited reason for playing video games is spending real money.
Of course.
Which is pretty obvious. Anyway, but why do you think you play video games, Humberto?
All right. Well, if I think about why I started playing video games, there was nothing like it. Because every game that I could play with cars or with my toys, my action figures, or just with guns pretending to shoot each other, or just running around playing tag and all these things, was bound by the laws of physics. My action figures, I had to make them talk myself. All these things, right? But here on the computer screen, it seemed like anything could happen. Physics didn't need to matter. All of a sudden, things could talk by themselves. Monsters could become real. All these things. So it was like, it was like the holodeck. Like everything was possible, and so that became sort of unbeatable. Nothing else could compare to it. I remember that feeling when I first played video games. I think probably the very first video game was as a little sit down of Galaxian, I think, maybe also Pac-Man or something at a restaurant, and I just remember that feeling of like, oh my god, like these little creatures, I'm making them move and
Right. It's
got all these
funny.
sounds
It's
and
funny you're bringing that
sights.
up because you and I were at the cusp of video games.
Yeah,
Where when we were young, we didn't have them,
right.
and we played the old-fashioned way, which is to pretend.
Yeah,
And then these video games come along, and suddenly we live in both worlds.
yeah,
And I've never heard it put into words before, but you are, which is when video games first came out, I suddenly had I had things that were in my head represented in the real world that I could actually manipulate.
yeah,
And although I enjoyed it in my head and I enjoyed drawing it on my piece of paper, it was so much more expedient
yeah.
to just pop in the cartridge and play it
Yeah.
on the TV.
You're driving a Ferrari through the beach
Yeah.
with like music and
Well,
you know-
before that, it's
No, I know, but
Space Invaders and
Sure, but I'm just like extrapolating to that idea of every milestone of gaming. It just up the stakes, you know, like
Well, but I think that even with the very first games, it essentially meant that if you wanted to, you didn't have to really pretend anymore.
Right.
You could actually play, because before video games, you still had all the same desires
Yep.
to blow stuff up, to shoot things, to be powerful, to gather loot. But you had to do it in your imagination
Right.
or with play. And suddenly the video games come out and it's like, oh, well, I guess I could sit in my room and imagine all this, or I could just play the video game.
Yeah, and like for example, if you wanted to play in real life with your friends, you can't run as fast as a car. You can't jump from a building.
But you can
can't-
pretend.
You can pretend. You
And
can
we
certainly
did all the
pretend.
time. We did all the time.
You can definitely do that. But in the video game, you can do that, all of it,
Right.
and more. You can fly through space. You can do whatever.
Yeah. The reasons why I play video games, if you know, and I guess it would take a long time to really describe it, because I've, you know, in the 30, 40 years of video games that I've played, there's been a lot of different reasons, but I tend to have themes. Like I love strategy games, and the reason why, you know, like Civilization or RimWorld or what's the new space, you know, galaxy planet game? I can't remember what Stellaris is called. The reason why I like these games is because it's a puzzle. It's slow, because I hate games that make me stressed out. Like if I'm playing a first-person shooter, particularly PvP,
Yeah.
my adrenaline is going.
Right.
And I typically play video games just before I go to bed.
Oh.
And so if I play something that's scary, it's not a good environment to fall
Yeah.
asleep to. Plus, it's just not really my life anymore. I don't like to have that adrenaline, and I realize I'm in the minority. I mean, Fortnite and you know those Apex, whatever.
Apex Legends.
These kinds of movies or these kind of video games are so stressful to me that I don't care how good I ever get at it. It's just not fun.
Right.
Now, if I'm playing against a computer, it's definitely a step down. But what I do like to do is actually watch people play these video games on Twitch and YouTube, because like there's this one game that tries to recreate World War II. I can't remember the name of the game, but it's they actually have you can talk to the people who are close to you. And they usually will, before you do a mission, there's usually like a captain who's like, okay, everyone gather around. Here's the mission. We're going to be going against the computer. We're going to be going against these other players. And
Right.
we got to do this. And you get shot like once, you're dead. And you don't respawn.
Right.
And so, and like people are shooting at people from very far away.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you would in real life.
Yeah.
And they're suppressing fire, and there's, you know, and so, now I'll watch a game like that, but my God, I could never play it. I'd be too stressed out. Anyway, so I love the slow games. I love the strategy games. I love the puzzle aspect to it. And I love the the sort of progression. You know, you're building techs. You're it's not a static game. You're always kind of, your army's getting bigger. Your territory's getting bigger. I also like it, so it feels like accomplishing something. You know, it feels like I'm, you know, a business owner and I'm getting more territory for my Pizza Hut or something.
Yeah.
And there's literally games where you could do that. But the other aspect I like it is the unknown, like the fog of war.
Right.
You never know what's beyond the fog of war. When am I going to bump up against, you know, I'm playing Rome. When am I going to bump up against Germany and how? And I'm trying to race to get my territory up to that point, but I don't want to be too thin on my army because then he can invade me.
You don't know what they've got, how far they've advanced.
Right.
Yeah.
Or even what civilization is over there.
Right.
And so the discovery and the searching of the fog of war and looking for resources is also something that I really like. Now, I definitely like first-person shooters, but I like to play against the computer. I kind of like the story, but usually I'm just like, just get me to the action.
Right.
Especially because a lot of the stories are so bad.
Yeah.
Like, I remember the Black Ops Call of Duty.
Yeah, because both you and I really liked Modern Warfare. That story was great and it had some moments. Remember how we would talk about like the helicopter moment and everything?
Yeah.
But then
because it was down to earth. It was like there's a group of soldiers and they're on a mission to save a guy or to get a thing. Yeah. And there's a helicopter that's coming in, you know, but then Black Ops comes along. Yeah. And it's like what's that Japanese game that was really popular?
Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah, Metal Gear Solid, where the storyline, it's like they're in your head and you're part of the Matrix. Yeah. And it's like, what the fuck is happening right now? You know what I mean? Yep. Halo's that way to me. Yeah. Like the whole Halo storyline, I understood the broad strokes. You know, you had
well, the first one especially, it was more straightforward.
But even the first one, I didn't really understand. Like I understood,
see what you're saying.
I understood the missions. I understood what I was supposed to do.
I just think by the third one, it's way complicated.
Right, because to the fans, they read all the books, you know, they went online, and the story was an advancement of their understanding. Yeah. But to me, I'm like, I'm lost. So usually when I'm playing a game, I'm so lost that I completely give up on the story. And especially if there's a lot of dialogue that I'm like, I don't even know what's happening. Right. That's a bummer to me.
So I recently watched Rob Zombie's movie 31. Did you ever see that?
No.
And it reminds me a little bit of this because I love House of a Thousand Corpses. It's just a good horror movie. You know, I like it. And it's because, well, one of the things that makes it great, it's fairly straightforward. These two dudes arrive at a little roadside attraction, and then their car mysteriously breaks down, and then they have to endure horrific horrors from a crazy family. End of story. This movie, 31, tries to set up all this other, like, it's a world of these people that are kidnapping people to torture them, and then they gamble and they do all these things, and then there's all this symbolism, and there's way too many characters, and it's just like you lose the thread of what the heck is supposed to be happening, and it's boring. Yeah. So it's a similar thing where you're like these games that have these really complicated storylines, and you're like, I just want to play.
Another reason why I play video games is to pass the time. So. Like really mindless games like this one game I've been playing. There's two games I've been playing on my phone for the past, 5 years. I play Settlers of Catan, which is just the board game on my phone.
And is that against the AI, basically?
AI, yeah. And then I became really good at that game,
nice.
By the way. I mean, I must have played thousands of games against the computer. Oh, my God. Because, the average person plays one game a year with their friends. And the other game,
you have all these strategies and stuff,
right? And shortcuts of I know how to do a turn real fast. And Splendor, which is a game kind of like Settlers of Catan, but it's with coins and and it's so both of these games are games you can actually play in real life, like a board game, and they put them on the phone, and I play those games all the time. I also been playing Ticket to Ride, which is another board game that I play on my phone. Anyway,
I've been playing. Did I tell you I've been playing this game called Death Road to Canada? It's pixel art, like 8-bit style. game. It's available on Steam. I have it on the Switch, and on the Switch you can play up to 4 players. I think that's true probably on all the. And so you know, you and I could be playing, and it's like Oregon Trail, where you're in the car, and when you're in the car, you can't do anything. You just see all these little things that are happening, and they're random. So like, you know, oh, your car breaks down, a zombie attacks, one of your party dies, or something like that. But then when you arrive at a city, you get out of the car, and then you're controlling your little characters, and you're beating up on the zombies, and you're grabbing stuff, and it's super fun. It's also frustrating because it's random, right? So like you'll be doing really well, and all of a sudden dysentery.
Can you save your game?
You can, but once you die, you have to start over. So saving is only so that you can like maybe put it down for a while. And
But if
come
you
back
die, you can't reload.
you can't reload.
Oh, brutal.
Yeah. So it's that kind of game.
See, I don't like games like that because
But it only takes like, if you were lucky, you could probably get to Canada and finish the game maybe in like 3 hours or something, you know.
still, that's way too long for my taste. When I was younger, I might have had
Yeah.
time for that. Plus, again, stressful.
Yeah, it is
You know?
stressful.
I do a lot of like, I need to reload five turns ago. I want it to be easy,
Yeah.
but not too easy, obviously. But I don't mind games being easy. Like sometimes I play Civilization, and I take over the world without really even attacking anybody. You know, I just sort of defend my borders, and I'm not even really interested in war with anyone. You know, it's just kind of fun to do that action of like building your economy, making sure your people are happy, you know, doing enough diplomacy, building your tech.
Like SimCity.
Yeah, it's basically like SimCity, and which is another game I like, SimCity, and also City Skylines, which is which I loved playing that game as well.
That one came out like 5 years ago or something.
Yeah, or maybe longer.
So I mean, the thing about this one though is the real goal. Like, sure, you can get to Canada, but you don't have to. Like the fun part about it is so much random little stuff and a lot of like inside jokes, and you kind of want to just see all the content. Who are you gonna pick up? Who's gonna be? You know, like one of the things you can find is a dog, and the dog can become one of the players, and the dog can't carry well, they can carry a weapon, but only like in their mouth. But they can bite the zombies, and you know, so there's all these like fun little things about it. And since it's cute 8-bit art, you don't really mind that it's, you know, like I've never gone to Canada, but it doesn't matter.
Now, co-op games, I love to play like that. Like if we were at a party or something, like that'd be a blast. Like, you know, Mario Kart. Like I would never play Mario Kart on my own,
Right.
But I'd love to play with other people. Right. I got a Oculus Quest,
Right.
You know, the kind of VR that you don't need all the equipment.
Cables, yeah.
And I was obsessed with it for about like 1.5 days, and then I just never picked it up again. Really.
What were you playing with it?
I played the boxing game, Apollo Creed. I played the Star Wars game where you have lightsabers, which was kind of interesting. But you know, these VR games, in essence, are games basically from the 80s.
Yeah.
That are in VR.
Yeah.
So I'm waiting for, which I'm sure will happen, I'm waiting for actually good games that aren't just good for VR, but are actually good games to come out in a VR platform. Because it's like, after you get over the novelty of it being in VR, it's like, well, this is kind of, the mechanics are dumb. It's repetitious. I'm not really challenged. I figured out how the AI works, and it just doesn't hold my attention. Now, what I understand, you know, the Quest, you can only have certain dumbed down sort of games. Like if you have the regular 8 HP Vive and the actual Oculus, Oculus whatever, you can play the more high-end PC-based games. Like you can play Skyrim, for example. But again, Skyrim came out on consoles. Essentially,
like 15 years ago.
I mean, it's basically Oblivion, which came out a long, long time ago. And although Skyrim's a lot better than Oblivion, but it's basically the same game. And so,
10 years ago. But
I can still play Skyrim on my console.
Yeah.
And so, I'm just waiting for like the games to come out that really, really, you know, Beat Saber is one of those games where it's like you can't really play that on your computer. Sure. It's a complete, and I like to play that game, but again, I'm not really into those kind of action-y games, you know?
Yeah.
And Beat Saber's pretty fun though.
Right. Well, you know, I totally agree. So I've had a similar experience with VR, and this is fundamentally, I believe, what's at stake. And this is what I meant by how when I first saw video games, physics need not apply. And what I was trying to say that, hey, look, in real life, we can pretend all we want that we're actually superheroes flying through the air, but we're not. We know we're not, but we can pretend. But in the game, you can. But if you had to actually, like with the Kinect, right? Like if you had to actually jump 10 feet to jump 10 feet in the game, well, you can't. And even if you are just doing mundane things like, okay, well, the goal of this game is for me to fight, box, right? But in order to do so, I literally have to box and like duck when I need to duck. And well, see, like we are not that good we're not great athletes. We're not great superheroes, any of that stuff. What we are good at is we've evolved hand-eye coordination for millennia, millions of years. And so we're at the point now where we can pretend to be that good at almost anything as long as we're using our best attributes. And that's the hand-eye coordination. So we can actually control these little things and fly through the air and be super. So I think VR with a normal controller or keyboard and mouse or something like that, and where you're not actually leveraging the VR for physical movement and physical dancing and all that other stuff, but just because of the immersiveness aspect of it. What was the number one thing in that survey? Immersion. I think that's where it's going to be, if it is going to be.
Yeah, there's a big problem with VR in that way, in that in the real world, you have thumbs and fingers and you can pick things up. In the VR world, the Oculus Quest does a pretty good job of it, actually. The controller knows when you actually grip the controller, and then your actual hands in the game grip.
Yeah.
And then if you actually point with your finger, it actually points with your finger in the. It's weird. It's like it senses all that, that kind of censoring. But even then, it's like it's not exactly right, and so it gets a little frustrating sometimes. Like I'm trying to grab my gun from my holster, and it's like I can't fucking grab it.
I fundamentally believe this is why both VR and the Kinect are aiming in the wrong direction, and the Kinect realized that too late after. It's that. The goal isn't one-to-one emulation of our capabilities. Because if it were, you're limited by what you can and can't do physically. Imagine just from let's say you are actually handicapped and you're missing an arm, and the game requires 2 actual arms to play. Well, that sucks, right?
Well, and people are lazy and they don't want to get off
absolutely.
Get off the couch.
So now imagine that you actually advance the technology to the point where you can actually use your real brain. You don't even need your hands to control the character in the game. It's still your brain. And if presumably you're using your motor cortex, I suppose, to still kind of control this character in the game, you're still limited. Like you don't have the reflexes of Superman, even in a video game. So the way that video games do this is they trick you, right? You don't really, when you're playing Call of Duty, you don't have that kind of endurance in real life. You don't have that kind of aim in real life. You don't have any of that stuff. They just trick you. So I think the secret is going to be not trying to do one-on-one emulation. Forget hands and arms and legs. Just give me a really good controller so I can leverage my hands and not to emulate my hands, just so I can control things in the game. And use the immersion because it's a 360 view. It has 360 surround sound. And give me a game, like you're saying, that's actually a good game.
And they do that to some games. There are flight sims in VR. There are spaceship sims. Yeah. Anyway, let's take a break. And when we get back, let's answer some of famous patron Lyndon's questions.
Let's do it.
So if Steve Jobs were alive today, he would be trying to promote his next VR machine. And if Steve Jobs were alive today, trying to convince everyone to buy his VR headset and also trying to get people to become patrons of the podcast, what would Steve Jobs say?
Is it public persona Steve Jobs or behind closed doors? Or maybe I'll do a hybrid.
He's either in an interview or he's on stage.
All right. So the thing is that for all of human history, We have been bound by our minds and by what we can do with these machines. But you gotta understand, there are now buttons. These buttons let you do things that you couldn't even imagine before. Like with a little quick click, you can send beautiful funds off to support something like Psychology in Seattle. And that is something that throughout a millennia, like millions of years, humans have been dreaming of doing, and they've never been able to do it. Now you can do. God, stop this interview. What the hell is going on? Why is that light flashing on me? You're fired. You're fired. You're fired.
Famous patron Lyndon says, Kirk Umberto, is there any empirical support for the old cliche that men marry women like their mothers? Umberto, what do you think?
That's a very interesting one. I have certainly been guilty of looking for, without knowing it really, but looking for traits that were probably a replacement for what I wanted my mother to be. But ironically...
Consciously?
No. It's just what I mean is that... okay, so two things. When I was... when I look back at a lot of the girlfriends that I had or relationships I tried to have, I certainly didn't know it consciously at the time. But one thing I was really longing for was female approval. Just female approval, which clearly in my mind is, does mommy think I'm okay? Why did she leave? Does she think I'm not okay? But maybe she can still tell me I'm okay. Like that kind of thing, right? So I was seeking that. But then the weird part is, what seemed to make me more comfortable were some of the traits that I don't like about my mother, like cold detachment. Like, I'm here, but I'm not here.
So to answer famous patron Lyndon's question, you were
I was kind of
trying to marry your mother,
but without knowing it.
Yeah.
And we know that I think this works in reverse too, like gals trying to marry their fathers.
Right. So to answer the question, first off, let's expand this question to include all genders and all sexual orientations. I mean, you're saying that men marry women like their mothers. It's really a question of, do we marry our parents? And we might focus a little bit on our, if we're heterosexual, we look to our opposite gender parent. But really, we're attracted to... If we're attracted to anything, we're attracted to qualities of both of our parents.
Yeah.
Maybe particularly of the whatever gender we're attracted to, but it's more a function of when we're growing up. One, we become comfortable with certain kinds of personality traits. For someone who grows up with an aggressive, angry parent, then they are going to be way more comfortable, ironically, with anger and aggression and hostility than someone who didn't. And so even if you're not attracted to anger and hostility, at the very least, it just doesn't raise red flags the way it would to someone else who never saw that growing up. But yes, we absolutely are attracted to those things because, one, when we internalize those relationships, so whatever qualities we wanted our parents' love and attention. We needed it. Whoever our caregivers were, who we identified as, it could be your grandparents, could be your older siblings, and you internalize everything about them because of the way that development and projective identification works and attachment. It's a long story, but we internalize the whole thing as being associated with love. So if you have a loving mother, and she's also very talkative. And she's also very short. And she also has a big hairdo all the time. And she also likes to wear satiny clothing. Well, from the age of 0 until 5, you're downloading all those attributes as associated with love and attention and nurturance. You don't just absorb the nurturance, you absorb everything about that. The tone of her voice, the look of her hair, how much she talks, the way her clothing feels as she hugs you. And all those things become associated with love and attention for you. And so when you grow up, you tend to want to return to that. And by that, by implication, you're sort of attracted to both of your parents. But And we also, not only is it because we're comfortable and we're associating it, but we're also trying to correct for what happened in the past. And so all of us have been traumatized by our caregivers to some extent, either through large ways and small ways of just being like, your parents wouldn't let you stay up all night, and that really hurt your feelings. That that can be very, very hard on a kid, even though they need to go through that. And when we're older, we seek to recreate those relationships so that we can experience them in a new way, in a way that's more satisfying. And the only way we can do that is if we find partners who are actually at least similar to our parents. Having said all that, this is very hard to measure. Everything I've been saying so far, total psychobabble. Because how do we answer the question, are people attracted to their parents? People would be, just look to see if there's similarities. Well, what similarities are we going to look at? Are we going to look at height, skin color, personality? What part of personality? How do you measure that part of personality? Their preferences, their politics, their pheromones, the way they talk. Like, there's too many factors. And how do you even lock down that person has a personality like that person? We can't really even answer those questions right now. You can sort of approximate it like big 5 personality traits, but it's really hard.
It becomes kind of a horoscope thing, right? Like, this totally fits.
Right. Meaning that if you cherry pick the data,
right,
you will find similarities between your spouse and your parents. If you scan enough qualities, some of them are randomly by nature going to coincide. It's like the analogy I always say is like, I won't go into it, but anyway.
Yeah.
But there is evidence that we are highly influenced by certain things, like social class. We tend to marry people who are in our parents' social class. We tend to marry people who have the same accent as our parents. We tend to marry people and hang out with people who have the same religion, the same political views.
Is that do you think, because it could just be that's the only circle you're in, so therefore you really are not invited to parties with rich people, and you're not invited to whatever, or vice versa.
Yeah, so that's absolutely a factor. But even when you just survey people based on like, here's 10 people, who do you prefer to hang out with?
I see.
We tend to say, oh, I want to hang out with that person. Okay. And that person just, happens to look and sort of act like our parents.
Right.
We do this for a number of reasons. One, we're familiar with it. Things that are unfamiliar are a little scary to us. And we also kind of are always looking for our parents' approval. And one of the ways that we do that, whether we like it or not, is to kind of marry people who we think our parents are going to approve of.
Right.
But like I said, kind of psychobabbly in that we really just don't have any idea. And it's one of those questions that it just depends on what you look at. But most people who study this will say that, yes, we tend to be attracted to people who have a lot in common with our parents. Let's talk about evil Umberto.
Evil Umberto? Like my evil twin?
Someone wrote in and said, I wonder what you think of the idea of someone being evil. It seems as though you guys think, or you think, it seems as though you think that every pathological behavior and personality stems from some kind of trauma, attachment rupture, or injury from early childhood. I think about animals, cats in particular, because I have 4 of them. I have one cat who I was given by a neighbor when she was just a kitten. She was not mistreated or neglected. She is highly neurotic and skittish. It seems like she was born that way. Can people be born that way too? Can people be born evil? Umberto.
So I don't believe in absolute evil and good, in that there is no objective comparison to be made there against anything. But if you happen to, for example, be religious, at least in some kinds of religion, then certainly you could imagine that, well, this person might be aligned with hell or some equivalent, and therefore they are inherently evil. I don't believe in that. Now, of course, that's not to say that by my human perspective, there aren't people in this world that are that I certainly can call pragmatically evil. And how much of that came from their upbringing, or just, all of a sudden they have a tumor in their head, or they're psychopathic genetically, or all these things. There might be combinations of factors. So the ultimate answer for me is, technically speaking, in the sort of religious connotation of it, no, I don't believe people are evil. But I do believe that there are people that are more predisposed to doing what we consider bad actions. So we might even call them evil.
Yeah, good answer. I agree. The other way I'll answer this is we don't really know. And we probably won't know if people are born evil or not for another 50 to 100 years, maybe even longer. We don't even have really the precursors to a science to answer that question. Why do people act the way that they act? We probably, even once we do answer the question, computers will probably tell us the answer, and the answer will be so complicated, the computer will probably be the only one who even understands that answer. And because the brain is a pile of mush that somehow through billions of connections, somehow manages to produce a consciousness and motivation and somewhat of a consistency of personality usually. And to answer that, the way we're answering the question is so simplistic. It's sort of like if people, say 1,000 years ago, were asking the question of themselves, is Atlas holding up the sky, or is the sky holding up Atlas,
right,
or something like that? It's like your question is so wrong to begin with,
right,
that I can't even really answer the question.
Because he's standing on turtles. Duh.
So to answer the question, are people born evil, which is a natural question to ask, and a question and a conversation that I will entertain sometimes. It comes from such an ignorant place to begin with that people 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now will say, like, they were so dumb back then, they didn't even know what question to ask.
Sure.
Because the causality of human behavior, or really any animal's behavior, is so complex, particularly humans. We are bizarre creatures. We have thoughts and futures and pasts and abstractions and plans and moods and interpretations and narratives and stories and inspirations and emotions. And it's a bizarre mixture of strangeness. I mean, most Americans are having sex without trying to procreate. Most sexual acts in Western society, 99.9% of sexual acts or more, are done purposefully to not procreate. We are bizarre organisms. And 99% of what we eat, we don't need to be eating. Most of what we do has nothing to do with our survival.
Right.
And so, it's just bizarre. So we just don't know. We don't know the answer to that question. Are people born evil? Are they not? Genetics, it's probably due to a lot of things, including genetics. And we have to define evil, like, if we're talking about Charlie Manson or this kind of, or a mass killer or something. Do genetics play a role? Probably. Epigenetics play a role. Absolutely. Personality development, yes. Culture, yes. Trauma, yes. Everything.
Everything.
their biology, that their current mood of the day, what they ate that day, how much alcohol they drank. Everything plays a role for sure. Almost every evil person, but having said all that, almost every quote unquote evil person I've studied or met has had significant trauma in their lives. Now, a lot of people have significant trauma. So is it that you have to have the significant trauma
plus something,
plus the genetic disposition to do that? Maybe so. Hard to know, though. So it seems that in most cases, evil is at the very least caused by mistreatment and possibly dispositional traits. But some evil people seem to have born that way, meaning that they didn't have any massive mistreatment and they had a good enough childhood. But these people are rare. I've actually never met a person like that. It could be because I'm biased. Again, there's no way for anyone to know whether I'm biased about that or not.
I mean, in theory, Ted Bundy, based on what he says, what his family said, in theory, he wasn't terribly abused.
No, we went over this. Possibly. I mean, certainly according to him.
That's what I mean. I mean, like, I know that there was all sorts of issues, but what I mean is, based on how horribly he turned out by our standards, it's not like he was, a child slave victim for 10 years from the age of 1 or something like that,
No, but that's not even the sort of mistreatment that is usually present. Usually it's the sort of abandonment treatment that he absolutely did experience.
I'm compounding that with how many people experience that kind of abandonment.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, my point was simply like, it is quite possible that you could still end up being way more predisposed to ending up a certain way, whether or not you experienced that abandonment or those issues.
Yeah. The other thing is that we tend to look at some individuals and some behaviors as being like, something's wrong with that person. There's something different, and we need to put them in this other category. Ted Bundy, mass killers, they must be in this other category. They're not like the rest of us.
But it's the natural thing because of bell curves, right? Like, Jordan is another individual.
Okay, but so are people who get a lot of tattoos.
Sure.
Or people who hate to sneeze.
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, there are
are
extremes from the norm.
So are podcasters.
Yeah.
So are people who go into psychology. But no one claims that I was born a podcaster. I made a series of choices to become a podcaster, and that's another important thing, an important way of looking at these mass killers is they made a lot of choices to get where they are. And to ignore the choice is to ignore reality, that they chose it. A lot of people have fantasies of killing people. A lot of people have no empathy. A lot of people have mistreatment. These people chose this road, and they chose it. And although very few people, if any of the famous ones, were compelled, through delusion or something. But even then, plenty of delusional people get told by the voices to kill people, and most people never do. So it's important to recognize that we have free will, and in a lot of ways, and I woke up this morning and I put on this shirt, and although I'll always make the cultural argument as well, no one denies that I chose to wear this shirt, at least in part. I had something to do with that in terms of my own volition. Well, some people choose that lifestyle, and we don't have to put this genetic label on it.
Well, and to some extent, like the way I would characterize it at this point in the way I think about these things is, it doesn't matter whether they chose in a ultimate way or not. As society, we decide what kind of inputs we want to give people's brains going forward to try to minimize societal damage. And one of the inputs we decide to give people is like, hey, if you committed certain acts, we're going to put you in jail. And that's the set of inputs we are going to feed your brain from here on out. And then some societies, as they're doing that, add other brain inputs, like in Norway, they might make it a more welcoming environment, blah, blah. But that's the only thing we can do. So like the only thing we can do, because no one can answer like, is a human truly free or not? Or would you have always picked that shirt? We don't know. But what we do know is we can give new inputs into the system. And that's what so just because someone killed someone because when they were little, they were abused, it's like, that's a sad story. That's terrible. We still have to, as a society, give new inputs to that individual. And that new input might be, you're in jail and you're going to go through this re-education, or you're going to go through something. So we can't just look at it and be like, well, I see why you did it, therefore you're excused. Like, that doesn't work for our society. But that's different from saying...
But no one's saying that, you understand?
No, people do.
Well,
there are people that make that argument.
I'm not saying that.
Well, you're going further the other direction, but that's fine. Like you're more on the more on the side of like they made active choices. Therefore they should definitely be punished.
The question of why someone does something is largely a mystery that we
Which is exactly what I'm saying.
We can conceptualize.
Yeah.
And the other question of what do we do with these people is related, I suppose, to us trying to conceptualize and answer that question as to why they did it. But at the same time, justice isn't necessarily interested in, at least in America.
You're making the same point I'm making from a different angle.
Good.
It's just that what I'm adding is I don't care whether or not they made a choice because I don't know if they did. Sadly or not sadly, it doesn't matter. The net effect for our society was the same. People were murdered or whatever. So we have to act because we want to act because we want our society to operate in a certain way. And the net effect of that is we need to reprogram your brain from this moment on.
If it works.
When I say reprogram, I don't mean we're going to be effective at changing behavior. What I mean is give new inputs into the system. And I'm being a little obtuse here. I just like new inputs is anything. Our brain is constantly getting new inputs. So if every day of my life, my inputs are waking up in a small little dark apartment with no vitamin D and all these other things and blah, blah, that's one set of inputs. If then I get transplanted to a tropical island and every day is living on the beach, it's like completely different set of inputs. So that's the thing we can control as a society is what inputs we give an individual. And that's why if we give more nurturing inputs when they're little, if we give more nurturing school environment, more all these things, we can raise the odds that those inputs would net out positively for society.
Yeah. And, we're not doing enough in that way of public health to facilitate the reduction in mistreatment of children.
And then I guess my ultimate point is even if we did everything perfectly, the parents were great, the schools were great, the society is great, and that individual ended up still sadly murdering or doing whatever, I'm still not ready to conclude that there is such a thing as absolute, then that individual is just evil. Which is, I think, what's the difference between, you were saying, like, we like to think of Ted Bundy as, like, different. And I was simply making a point of, like, I think we think of anyone outside of the norm as different. But that doesn't excuse or, like we think of Jordan as different. Like Michael Jordan was clearly outside of the norm. And would everyone else who had practiced the same amount have been as good and successful as him? We don't know. Did he make all his choices? In some ways, but then
so actually Michael Jordan's a really good example of what the point I'm trying to illustrate, which is that people often, particularly people who aren't athletes, will point to Michael Jordan as, like, the question of, was Michael Jordan born a good athlete? What do you think most people would say?
Including me, I would say, well, yeah, definitely.
Definitely born a good athlete. He had a certain body type that lent itself to athletics. But the emphasis that people will put on his genetics is ridiculous.
Sure.
A lot of people are born like Michael Jackson.
Right. Or Jordan.
Michael Jordan, sorry. A lot of people are born like Michael Jackson, actually. And especially Michael Jordan and Michael Jackson, the amount of time that these individuals spent on their craft. And you can actually see in Michael Jordan's career moments where he wasn't very good, because he hadn't dedicated himself enough to the craft, and he got better. So sure, he had the genetic disposition. If he was born without the ability to walk, an extreme example, or frankly, if he was born like me, he never would have risen to the heights that he did. But there are a lot of people who are born with the natural talents that Michael Jordan had. But there was only one Michael Jordan, and that was because of his choices and his hard work. And in a similar way, a serial killer, a lot of people are born with in all likelihood, we can't really answer that question, but I would suspect that a lot of people are born with the same genetic qualities, so to speak, of dispositional personality traits as a Ted Bundy, but Ted Bundy was the one, and were mistreated in a similar way, but Ted Bundy was the one who made the choices to go down that road.
Right. So I think, practically speaking,
So in other words, I'm saying Ted Bundy is the Michael Jordan of serial killing.
that's right. So practically speaking, in a pragmatic sense, we have to maintain that narrative because, as I said, we have to feed the right kind of inputs if we want increase the odds of good outputs.
Exactly.
So if we don't feed that narrative to people, if we tell them, "Hey, your actions don't matter. You never make a decision." Well, that's a terrible input.
Well, one, you'll never get a Michael Jordan because no one will ever work, and two, you'll miss the opportunity to help the young Ted Bundys of the world avoid doing what they're going to do.
The only pedantic point that the hill that I die on nowadays is that we say, well, Michael Jordan had no choice on his genetics, so that would have been an unfair advantage or a lucky advantage or whatever. I extend that to all of it. It's all luck all the way down. It's lucky that he was born when he was born, from who he was born, where he was born. It's lucky the way his parents were with him, for better or for worse, because all those little inputs were inputs that lucked out to the way they did. It's lucky that his brain had just the right amount of willpower for whatever set of reasons that he did get himself to go to the gym. Because if you don't look at it that way, you're basically concluding that there is some little magical thing that's devoid of his physicality and his environment and his genetics.
Wow.
That was the thing. And so I'm actually saying it's all luck all the way down.
I mean, it's an old debate around consciousness that I don't want to get into.
But you of all people, because you're an environmental constructionist in a large way, if you don't admit that the environment is just as much part of the luck of an individual,
just as much,
right? Then we'd have a problem with your position. But
it just depends on the way you're looking at it. I don't disagree with the perspective that the way you're framing it in terms of luck and of, in a sense, predetermined sort of things, lots of factors playing into it in terms of what makes Michael Jordan. But it just depends on the lens you're looking through it. It's potato. You look at it in one lens, it's luck and in some way predetermined. In another way you look at it, it's Michael Jordan's conscious choice. There's no distinction between those two things. It just depends on how you look at it. And neither can be disproven because they're both essentially true, because they're both essentially pointing at the same thing, calling it something different.
Yep.
Let's talk about art. Someone wanted to talk about that. What is art and music psychologically speaking? Why is something that serves no obvious purpose, why is it so important to us? Beto.
Well, first of all, what serves a purpose? Well, we could take it from a simply an organism that is trying to survive in the physical world that we're experiencing. We could say that important to us is oxygen, followed by water, followed by some food, fine, and then all the Maslow stuff. But to say that art is not important is sort of like pre-concluding that you being alive is somehow super important. And I'm not ready to pre-conclude that. I'm ready to say, well, I don't know. What is important? Is it important that the Earth revolves around the sun? It's important to us because we want to be around, but what's important? So this important word is already like loaded with meaning. So to me, my personal feeling about it is that just breathing oxygen and eating food is sort of like just the entry table stakes to a no-winner game, whereas music and art are the things that you want to be breathing the oxygen and eating the food for. And I'm minimizing. There's other things, of course, relationships and things like that. But without the music and the art, all the other stuff is pointless. So to me, that's actually the most important stuff. The most meaningful stuff is the creation, is the things we create, and especially the things we create that have never been seen before.
Yeah, it's a good question. Why is something that serves no obvious purpose is so important to us? It is kind of weird that a painting by some old dead white guy is worth millions of dollars and is revered when if you just put it like in a secondhand store and didn't tell anybody, at least with some of the paintings, people would be like, whatever. So it's all about, and for some people that negates that kind of art, because there's lots of other art that your kids will do art, and that's art. Why is it important to us? Well, it's hard to know, but I would say that it's important because of meaning. Why is your nation important to you? Why is, I don't know, there's a lot of things that Humberto and I could do for money.
Yep.
And we make money from this podcast. But for many years, we didn't make a penny. In fact, we lost money on this podcast for the first 7 years of the podcast. So 7 years, every week, especially me, spending all this time on this thing that was producing no actual benefit to my life.
Yeah.
Why was I doing it?
No financial benefit.
No financial benefit, but also, there weren't that many listeners. There was no concrete thing that I got out of it. But what I did get out of it was meaning.
And that's concrete.
Okay. It's meaning. It's something. I got meaning, like I was connecting with people on the internet. I was advocating for things I wanted to advocate for. I was learning things that I wanted to learn. I was keeping my brain sharp. These are all, I guess you're calling it concrete. I'm going to call them intangibles. And art's the same way. Why do Humberto and I write music and record it when we absolutely know that 99 out of 100 listens will be done by us, the artist, and that we'll be lucky if another person even cares to listen to it? Well, we do it because it's expressive. It feels good. It's meaningful to, hold that up. Why does a whittler whittle a little bear and put it on their windowsill for only them to see? Because it's meaningful to us. We like it.
And I mean, I guess that thing is, I question that question about purpose in the first place. No obvious purpose presupposes that other things have obvious purpose. Like a building has an obvious purpose. And you could say, well, sure, it houses humans. I'm like, so what's the obvious purpose of that? And it's like, we're only looking at this from like this subsistence mentality. Well, we need to live to another day. Well, yeah, sure. That's the genetic programming to survive for no reason, no purpose. Whereas music and art, I would argue, for me, have more purpose. But in either case, it's like, it's hard to argue that is or is not purposeful.
This person also asks, why do some people feel compelled to make art while others don't? I've been wondering why I'm doing this to myself as a career, LOL. Berto, what do you think?
So there are people that I know that build furniture. I don't know if they would call what they do art. I don't know if other people would call what they do art. But they like doing it. They like working with wood. They like being in a shop. They like the idea of finding specific kinds of woods and all this. To me, this sounds completely boring. I don't think I'd be good at it. The whole idea of working in a shop with immediately turns me off. Why is that? In the meantime, the idea right now of like grabbing that guitar over there and just strumming it and coming up with a little melody line.
Don't touch my guitar.
Oh, I'm getting a little heavy here. So I think it's just a matter of preferences with everything else. Some people like running, other people hate running, but they like swimming. Other people, and so it's kind of hard to answer the why unless you can also answer the why of like, why do I like horror movies and you don't like horror movies? Yeah. It's kind of hard.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to it. I think there are certain personality traits to an artist. One is someone who's sort of open to things and wants to experience things. Also, being a little narcissistic is also a motivation. I love singing alone, and I'm the only one who can hear me. But I also like to be on stage and when I'm comfortable. Anyway, famous patron Lyndon has some more questions for us. He recently sent. What is something a lot of people assume about you and Berto that is completely untrue? So about you.
Right.
So what's something a lot of people assume about you that is completely untrue?
For some reason, a lot of people seem to assume that I switch jobs a lot, which is completely untrue. That's one thing. Another thing is, I bet you people assume that I'm very confident in a lot of situations, or maybe most situations. And I'll say that I have an ability to project as if I am confident, but that I am often very non-confident and sort of terrified in my head about a lot of situations. Anything to do with manual effort, like if we talked about, like if you're like, hey, Berto, can you help me put that shelf up? Here's a hammer, like just nail it. I'm immediately like terrified. I'm going to screw it up. I don't know what you were asking me to do. What's a hammer? But outside, I'll be like, sure, of course I can help you. You know, like these kinds of things. So I think that I do a decent job of projecting a certain kind of confidence, but it's not always true. In fact, a lot of times it's not true under the surface.
Yeah, that's a narcissistic thing as well. And in that, for narcissistic people to cope with the massive insecurity, or at least the degree of insecurity that one has, they cope with it by trying to act like they are not only just kind of confident, but they're very, very confident, so that at least other people are tricked into believing that they're confident, and that somehow provides some narcissistic supply. But what it does is it denies, because I'm like that too, us the opportunity to get some help from other people.
Totally.
And also just emotional help
Yeah.
of just like being seen and understood. Yeah, it's funny because I wrote the exact same thing down. Was people probably assume, and I've heard this before, that I'm 100% confident when there's just I'm not. I'll never forget. I went to graduate school to get my master's 23 or 4 years ago, and in my master's degree, I felt completely out of my league. I was a fish out of water. I'm a football jock in a grunge band who was in a fraternity, who worked, in Bellevue in like Microsofty businessy stuff.
Yeah.
And I went to therapy for, a few months, but I don't hang out with liberals. I don't hang out with granola types, really. I don't know therapist language. I certainly didn't study a lot of sociology or psychology prior to that. I didn't know the major figures. I barely understood anything. I was completely, of all the students in my classes, I always felt like I was the most ignorant. And I've told this story before, but in quarter one, we studied empathy, which is a pretty obvious thing for therapists to study.
Yeah.
I had no idea what my classmates were talking about. The professor just throws out, okay, let's talk about empathy. All my classmates, including Bob,
Okay.
empathy this, empathy that, and I'm just like, how come everyone knows this stuff? Like, what world did they come from? So the whole time I'm in graduate school,
That's hilarious.
I'm like lost, and I know it, and I wasn't afraid to kind of express that too. Like,
Okay.
I don't know what's happening. The last day of class, we're sitting in this small Antioch circle of about 5 or 6 students.
Mm-hmm.
It's my last day of class, and all of us are graduating, and so each of us is going around sort of giving appreciations. And people are like to Jennifer, oh, you're so nice, you're always supportive, you're so smart, you're going to be a great therapist. Oh, John, you're a sweet guy, and I know you get a little insecure sometimes, but you're going to be a great. And I felt like everyone was really nailing everyone around the room. Everyone gets to me, fellow classmates.
Yeah.
Most of them, half to most, said, so Kirk, you always seemed like you knew what you were doing.
Oh.
And I think you're going to do really well because you don't seem to be as scared as the rest of us.
Wow.
and you just seem so competent all the time.
That's
and
hilarious.
like you don't really need anyone's help, and you're doing great.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it was I was fired from my first internship, and so I was very open to my first supervisor, and he emotionally abused me while he was my supervisor. I didn't know he was or at least I felt he was emotionally abusing me, but I just blamed it on myself.
Yeah.
And then after just like 6 to 8 weeks of supervision into like a year-long internship, he blasts me with this 2-page account of every unethical, horrible thing I had done.
Oh my God.
And all the different things had to do with me being open with him. Like he would ask me about my sexuality. He asked me about, one of the things and I told him, I was just like, well, he's my supervisor. I'm going to be open with him.
Yeah.
He asked me about my views on how do I treat people who are addicted to alcohol, and as a therapist. And I said, well, I don't know, because I'm not an experienced therapist. This is my first 2 weeks of being a therapist. I don't even have a client yet.
Yeah.
But I've heard in class that some people believe that you're supposed to refer them out to get them sober, and then we can work with them as therapists. But I also heard that some people will say, I'll work with you, and I'm going to encourage you to get sober and encourage you to go to treatment, but I'm not going to terminate with you as a client, because I'm going to try to help you get through this time. That's basically what I said, which is, the right answer.
Sure.
Well, in his blast to me, and one of the points of reasons why he was firing me was because I had an unethical approach to treating people with alcohol, and I was going to treat them and let them drink, essentially.
Oh my God.
And so after that,
Sounds so crazy.
so after that, it was.
Oh, I'm so sorry you had to go through that.
Yeah, I almost didn't become a therapist. When he fired me, I was like, okay, well, that's that. I guess I'm gonna go back to business world. And then I had someone convince me to stay. But and incidentally, like if you want to read that full story, buy my book, Multi-Role Clinical Supervision. I write the first chapter is a lot about that whole event, which kind of began my journey of trying to figure out and learning just how shitty the average supervisor is, because he wasn't the only abusive supervisor I had.
Oof.
So my point was that, what was I even talking about?
Well, so you were talking about how you were dealing with this situation.
Oh, so with him, I after became very closed, and I can be kind of aloof anyway, but after this guy, I think I really became aloof, because I was just like, I need to be on my P's and Q's.
Yeah.
I need to not extend myself. I can't answer authentically, because what if it's the wrong answer? I have to be very careful with what I say. So maybe that was part of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, the last day, everyone's just like, you just got it
so
all figured out.
You got it figured out.
And I was 100% sure that I was the least confident person in that class. And everyone is saying,
Wow.
all they can say, and none of them said like, you're a nice guy, you're very supportive. Like the only thing they could say about me was that, man, you're just a cool guy.
Yeah.
You just seem to got it all figured out in a good way. They weren't being mean about it. And I was like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
How is it that I, on the inside, am utterly terrified all the time?
Right.
And somehow I'm giving off this impression that I've got it all figured out. Why is that happening?
Right.
It just has to do with the way I was raised and the coping mechanisms I have. Like when I'm terrified, like I just freeze and try to act like everything's fine because I'm trying to be safe. But the vibe I give off is one of aloof confidence.
And you and I have talked about on my side how, and I do it less and less as I get older, but I can give off a vibe of not only I'm confident, but actually somehow inciting some types of people to want to knock me down a peg or two.
Right.
By like, well, I guess I'm going to make fun of that guy because he shouldn't be this confident, damn it.
Right, exactly.
Or something like that. And so I also can relate to the whole abusive supervisor, like manager thing, like in that, that there was this one occasion one experience I had in my job that was really like that, where all of a sudden I got presented with all these bad things I was doing or whatever, right? And a lot of it had to do with me just naively being too open with people and sharing my thoughts and things like this, and then it all kind of got used against me in a court, you know, and that feeling is horrible.
Yeah.
Especially when you depend on these people to guide you.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me about it. Lyndon asks also, what did you and Humberto make of the rave scene?
The rave scene in a movie, or no, like the actual rave scene culture. Yeah. Oh, right. Oh, yeah. So first of all, I hate scenes. I don't like scenes. I don't like large groups of people doing stuff. I don't like, I'm straight edge, I'm grunge, I'm this. I hate it. I've always hated it. I don't like wearing the clothes because this is the kind of people we are. So I definitely, the rave scenes rubbed me the wrong way. And I didn't understand, to this day, I still don't understand. I guess it's related to the drugs, but I didn't get like the lights and the little suckers in their mouths and the little backpacks and the little like kitty, like how kitty it was. And I don't like it. But the music, I like the music. and you know, when I would go to one with friends, like I went with Ron, a couple things, like those huge parties in Seattle that, you know, I had fun. I danced all night. It was great. I just wasn't into the scene.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I actually wrote a song making fun of ravers in the 90s. It's actually called Candy Raver, because there were different ravers. You had candy ravers and like goth ravers. And if you go on Spotify, people out there, and you go to my band Bread Knife Incident, on my third album, Cozy, I actually have a song called Candy Raver, in which I'm basically, I do a kind of call back and forth between, there's this Candy Raver guy who, a lot of frat guys are trying to buy his drugs, and they're in the bathroom at a rave event, and he is just like, no, I don't have any more drugs, or it's just this conversation, and the frat guys are making fun of him, and he's making fun of the frat guys.
I see.
And anyway, so now when I think of the rave scene, I was alive and at dance clubs before there was a rave scene, really.
Yeah.
In 1990, I fell in with this crowd that was really big into the dance clubs, and this is before raves were at least popular in Seattle anyway. Yeah. And it was called the house music scene. They called it house music. This would be like CNC Music Factory, D-Light, those kinds of bands.
Right.
And it was a crazy scene. You know, it was like all the cool people in Seattle. You had to know the right person. There were definite cliques at the clubs, you know, oh, there's so-and-so and his entourage. And the bouncers all knew each other. And the big place to go in Seattle was called Celebrity, which is where Trinity is now. I'm not quite sure.
Oh, interesting.
Or maybe Dutch Ned's or one of those places. And I was 19 and you had to dress the dress. Oh, George Michael was really big in that group too. You had to, like, I remember we would dress in these really short shorts.
Oh, really?
like cut off jeans, and like a white tank top.
Oh.
And big combat boots.
What? Okay.
And mirror sunglasses.
Okay.
And your hair had to be real kind of military cut, you know, real kind of short for the time. But anyway, there's a whole scene, and I loved it because I was 19, and what did I know?
Right.
Neighbors was another kind of part of that scene as well. I mean, now Neighbors is full of a whole different crowd, but back then it was actually mostly gay people. But anyway, so I was really into that. And then when the rave scene came out, I kind of felt like I'd already been through the whole dance music and, club scene. Yeah. And so when they started calling them raves, I was like, why are you calling them raves? It's just a fucking dance party. It's just a DJ in a thing. And then And then it became popular with really young people. And then you had these gigantic things,
Right.
like they used to have them at the like pier, one of the piers by the ferry terminal.
Yeah.
This like one rave group used to rent out this gigantic terminal for raves. But they were always kind of illegal because and they would do that. They would they'd get arrested, they'd get a ticket, but they would have sold so many tickets that it didn't matter anyway. And so there's all these little, it was always like, and this is again before the internet, so you had to get these flyers. They were always like these really trippy psychedelic flyers that only some people got. You know, it's had that era of exclusivity. And then you fast forward a few more years, and then the raves got totally fucked out. You know, like the radio stations were putting on quote unquote raves.
Sure.
You know, and they were getting into the Manchester music scene.
Okay, because like when I was going to raves, it was way the hell after that when like United States of Consciousness and stuff, those huge things and stuff. But it wasn't. Everyone knew about it. Like it was nothing underground about it.
Right. So I saw that whole thing evolve. And I didn't really like it from the beginning, and I was never into all the psychedelic drugs. That was just not my thing. And so, but I didn't really even associate the drugs with the rave scene because there were certainly a lot of drugs in the house music scene. It was just like, anyway, it felt like it got real trendy real fast, and also it got younger and younger. I mean, like 13-year-old kids were going to raves, and I was just like, why as a 25-year-old man would I want to go to a 13-year-old party? You know, it just seemed really stupid.
The thing I used to love, I definitely loved it because I grew up in a dance culture in Colombia, you know, and before moving here, our parties, all the parties were dance parties, but they were Colombian dance parties, you know, like Latin dance parties, which meant two things. One, it was never like you dancing by yourself. It was always dancing with a couple, right? And you needed to learn the steps. You couldn't just like fake your way. Like you had to know the steps. But all the parties, all of them had dancing.
Yeah, I mean, just to put a fine point on it, last year when I went down with you to Bogota, we were with your family pretty much the whole time.
Right.
And there were a few different parties, one of which was in the dead of the afternoon.
Yeah.
On like a Sunday at like 2, and it was your grandmother's birthday party.
Yeah.
A surprise birthday party. And your grandma's like 80 or something.
92.
92.
Yeah.
And
91, sorry.
so then you have all the generations. You have, you know, the older generation, they're in their 60s or something.
Yeah.
So it's like your parents' generation.
Yeah.
And then it was our generation of late 40s.
Yeah.
And then you had the next generation of like the 20s. And then you had another generation of like 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
And yet it turned into this dance party.
Yeah.
And the music from minute one was blasting.
Yeah, like crazy.
Like, and there was this guy who had a keyboard and a drum machine and a kickin' PA system in a small room.
Yeah.
Like think like, I don't know, just like a big rec room essentially.
Right.
And he is jamming and singing and dancing, and it's this Latin music, and it is loud.
And everyone, old to young, they're all dancing.
Yeah.
And
the gringo like me sitting in the corner, I'm kind of hungover from the night before.
so
and
you're like, oh, why is it so loud?
and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to drink with Humberto and his friends later tonight. So I just have to like chill right here for a bit. And all your aunts were trying to grab me to dance. And I'd be like, oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'm such a terrible Latin dancer that it just is embarrassing.
So coming from that, and I moved when I'm 15, you know, so that's what I've been exposed to. But I've been going to these dance parties since I was like 12, you know, like, or 11. So and the thing that I love doing here is going, when we would go to a dance, is because I wanted to hear the new wave music, you know, The Cure, Depeche Mode, Nine Inch Nails, and then even like Skinny Puppy or stuff like this. And I loved dancing to it. And I loved sitting there and dancing. And it was a completely different style of dancing. It was me just doing whatever. It was very freeing. Me and my friend Ty Verzoni, we would a lot of times just the two of us on the dance floor going crazy. So I love that. And then I really loved the Underground Dance Club in the U District because that's the kind of music they played. I loved dancing there. But to me, it was never about substances back then. Like I certainly wasn't drinking then. I wasn't taking any drugs. It was just the dancing and the music, and I loved it. So by the time that I was years and years later being invited to these kind of dance things, I have to say for me, it felt like a lot of the point was the drugs. Like I felt like I didn't partake much, but I got the sense that for a lot of people, it was like, because they made a big deal out of it. Oh, we're going to get this special blue Molly this weekend, and then we're going to get this other thing. And they would talk a lot about it and plan a lot about it and then take it. And then it was a big part of the thing. So for me, that aspect as well was sort of like really not that interesting.
Yeah. Another Lynn question. What's the longest you've ever been awake, and what was it like?
Oh my God, 3 days, and it was terrible. And I nearly lost a leg. So... I'm serious. I'm dead serious. Yeah.
I cannot.
You're not expecting that.
Wait to hear this story.
You're not expecting that. Yeah, man. It was tough. It was tough potatoes. So, because what happened is I was working, and you know, when you're young, or at least when I was young, I associated the length of time you're working on a thing with how good you're doing at it, or how macho you are being about the thing, or whatever it is. So we're doing this project. It's towards the end of the project, and I'm sort of a leader on the team. So I'm like, all right, well, we're gonna work late into the night, and then this first night I work all night through, and then it's the next day, no sleep, and I work all through the day. And that second day, I'm of course feeling like crap, starting to get a little foggy. And something funny starts happening that afternoon. My right foot starts feeling sore. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. I must have like twisted it or something. So slowly as the afternoon progresses, I start kind of limping a bit. And I start finding like when I'm talking with people and stuff, I want to put my foot up and rest it. And then the night creeps in and I'm still up. I haven't slept. And it starts getting worse. And then like the night happens and I'm still up, still going. And that whole night I'm still up. And as the night goes, my leg's getting worse and worse.
Wait, you're staying up because your leg hurts?
No, I'm staying up because we're working.
Oh.
Yeah. So we're working. We're pulling out multiple all-nighters in a row. So now it's the beginning of the third day.
Wait, on purpose, you're not going to sleep?
On purpose, yes.
And are you like, this is not a good idea?
No, I'm like, I gotta do this because I got a show and we gotta stay up because we gotta finish this project and stuff like that, you know?
Oh my God.
So now it's the third morning. It's like that third day.
Were you on drugs?
Nope.
So how do you survive?
I was early 20s. I was,
So you just stayed up all night?
Stayed up.
Did you drink?
Nope. There probably was some alcohol, but not a lot. Like there was some alcohol, but not a lot.
So you would
just like beers,
So you would stay up, just beer. So you stay up all night long.
Yeah.
Working.
Yeah.
You work the next day.
All next day.
Are you tired?
Yeah.
And you're like
foggy. But then like for a little bit, like these like surges of energy kick in.
And you're like, okay, another night.
Another night. And my leg is starting to hurt so much that I can barely walk. Now the new morning has started.
Okay, I'm going to hypothesize while you're that your brain was not working as well as you thought it was, because anyone who is having a tremendous pain in their leg would like go, well, maybe I should do something about this.
Oh, your hypothesis is if anything too generous. Yeah, no, of course. So the new day starts. I can't walk, man. It hurts so badly. So around 11 a.m. that morning, 11 a.m. of the third day, not sleeping for 2 nights in a row.
That's inhuman to be able to stay up that long without any drugs.
So, my voice is scratchy. I'm a fog. Things are surreal. My leg is hurting. So I'm finally like, guys.
Were you productive?
No, fuck no.
Were you productive the second day?
In bursts.
God.
So then I'm like, guys, I gotta go home.
And everyone else has been staying up this whole time?
In shifts. Some people have been up for 2 days. I don't think anyone was up for the third day. I think I was the only superhero idiot. And I'm like,
Had you done this before?
never that long. I had done all-nighters for sure.
God.
So I'm like, guys, I gotta go home. I don't know what's wrong with my life. I gotta go home. So I go home. I slept 18 hours. When I woke up from the sleep, I was in the worst pain I'd ever felt. My foot, my right foot, had swollen so badly. I certainly could not walk on it. It was like red and huge, and I was feverish. So I'm like, oh my God, I gotta go to the doctor.
Did you have an infection?
I went to the doctor. I'm nodding my head. Went to the doctor, and the doctor immediately was like, okay. So they drained fluid. They took a blood sample. It was a staph infection. Staphylococcus, right? Like,
How'd you get it?
bad bacteria. Well, that's the thing. I'm like, so what is this? And they're like, well, it's a staph infection. We're going to give you antibiotics. So just so you know, these things can be really dangerous.
You might have to lose your leg.
You're fine, but it can sometimes, you might need to lose a foot sometimes, things like that. And I'm like, oh my God. And then I'm like, well, how did this happen? I didn't injure myself or anything. And like, well, have you had any like cuts on your foot? And I'm like, a few days ago, I bonked my toe, and I had like a tiny little cut in the shower. And like, well, that could be it. And I'm like, really? I mean, that's happened before. It's never like, well, it could also be like your immune system could be down a bit. I'm like, but why? I'm like, well, have you been sick recently? I'm like, not really. Have you been getting good sleep? I'm like, well, I was up for 3 days in a row. And the doctor was like speechless, like, wait, what? Well, no, that's the reason. So they gave me this huge lecture. He gave me this huge lecture. Or so she, about, I can't remember. It was the ER anyways. It was this huge lecture about taking care of myself, and I can't do this, and I could have lost a limb, and it could be super serious. The infection could have spread to other parts of my body, including organs, all these things. I was scared shitless. I took the antibiotics. I did never pulled that shit off again, ever. It was so scary. That was my war story.
No wonder you're hypochondriac, man. Like, that is traumatic.
Yeah, that was traumatic. And it was self-inflicted, but, you know.
Yeah. One of the lesser known things about sleep is it absolutely helps with the immune system.
Yeah.
In the same way that our cognitive ability declines as we don't get sleep, so does our immunodefenses.
Totally.
So interesting.
And, you know, in my line of work.
Yeah. Longest I've ever been awake, I don't know. I certainly played around with sleep a lot when I was younger. And I was probably in high school because I would stay up all night with like Lita and stuff, and we would just talk and talk and talk on a school night. And my parents were lax enough that I could just stay out all night. I wasn't doing anything bad was the thing.
Yeah.
I was just talking about philosophy and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm fairly certain there was more than once when we both just stayed up and didn't sleep at all, and then just went to school. So there was probably, you know, what would that be, 36 hours or whatever, or 40 hours-ish or something.
Yeah.
Certainly, I'm sure that happened, you know, a couple dozen of times or something between the ages of 16 and 24. There's also a time in college when I thought that sleep was so illogical.
Right.
I was like, it's so illogical that I sleep. And I think I might have told you this before, that I was like, okay, well, you take 7 days, and if you sleep, you know, 8 hours a day, you get 16 hours of awake time each day.
Yeah.
But I want to be awake for more time. So what if I slept for 8 hours, but I slept for 8 hours after being awake for 18 hours? So this throws you off from the sun cycle. So you're up for 18 hours, you sleep for 8 hours. It was something like that.
Right. You eat into the day, so you start. There's some times where you're just awake at night, and then it cycles back through.
Right. Eventually, like, you're going to bed at a normal time, but what you do is you actually get a lot more waking hours to do things. And I did that for a few months.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yeah.
Weird.
It was fucking weird. And
Right.
again, it probably only worked because I was young.
So let me get this straight. So like, let's say you wake up at 9 the first time,
Yeah.
and
So the next day you wake up at 11.
right, because like you were gonna be staying awake instead of staying awake till say 10 or whatever, you'd go all the way to like 2, 3 or something.
Well,
And
so
then- and
I think
then-
it was 20 hours and 6 hours. I think I would stay up for 20 hours and I'd sleep for 6.
Oh my gosh,
So
okay.
I had a 26-hour day instead of a 24-hour
And no
day.
matter what time you woke up, you'd stay up for 20 hours.
Right. And I remember eventually just being like, it's so inconvenient because
Yeah.
everyone else is awake when I'm all sleeping, and it would just get kind of weird sometimes. But so I did stuff like that. But
Which is the problem with polyphasic sleep too, where, you know, people that try to
Right.
do that, because in theory it's supposed to kind of work, but like who can go like, oh, oops, I need my nap right this second. Like, come on.
Yeah.
And then it's throughout the day, all the time, doing naps randomly for 30 minutes here and there.
right. Plus, it's pretty solid science that we need 8 hours ish. Some people can get by with 7, and some people need 9.
Yeah.
And now you can survive on 5.
Yep.
You'll live, but you're not going to be optimized that's for sure.
Yeah.
Lyndon asks, what are some dickish tendencies you see in psychological professionals specifically? I guess I'll answer this one. Well, I see people being, clinicians being dicks by terminating their clients, like especially like their borderline clients, because the clients are not, quote unquote, not complying with treatment. I wouldn't call this dickish. I would call this kind of like typical behavior for therapists, but it's kind of dickish. But really kind of a dickish thing that I see clinicians do, particularly in academia and particularly in the field of psychology, meaning psychologists, is that they'll act like diagnosing is a science.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
They'll be like, oh, well,
it's like a perfect science.
yeah, clearly this person has narcissistic personality disorder.
Yeah.
And if you suggest at all, like I'll never forget, I'm in class and it's actually the Rorschach class. So we're
Okay.
doing the Inkblot projective
Yeah.
psychological testing course. So I took a whole course on how to do Inkblot testing, and it's actually pretty interesting stuff. It's not very useful in my opinion, but it's interesting. And the professor gives this gives this case example, a vignette. It's like a paragraph, describing someone. And then the class of us 12 people, we're supposed to discuss in the class forum what we think the diagnosis is, because
Got it.
we're trying to learn how to assess diagnosis.
Right.
And I'm listening to it and I'm like, huh. And I have a kind of a broader definition of borderline than most people.
Okay.
But it's not that broad. It's not like I'm completely off, my rocker. And so I hear it and I said something like, and I raised my hand and I was like, well, it kind of sounds like borderline to me. Now, I'm not expecting the professor to be like, oh my God, you're right.
You're a genius. That's
I'm just,
right.
I'm thinking this is going to be a conversation where we just sort of openly discuss our opinions of how we look at people and what labels we put to people.
Yeah.
But that's not how the rest of the class saw it, and it's definitely not how the professor saw it. Because he goes, why do you think borderline? And I was like, well, I kind of have a liberal definition of borderline, and I see attachment insecurity in that person and that kind of thing. And then this other class, one of my classmates said this like totally adolescent sarcastic joke making fun of me, saying something like, oh yeah, because all women who talk crazy, they're borderline, aren't they?
Oh no! Literally that joke about women?
Well, because that's the because it's a stereotype
Okay.
that women are bored. So he was sticking up for women.
So he was
And-
trying to make like, oh, you're being sexist kind of thing.
Yeah, even though
Even you
that
hadn't-
was not what I was saying. What I
Yeah.
was saying was it sounds like this because anyway.
Yeah.
And then everyone starts laughing, and then the professor doubles down and starts laying into me. And I'm like,
That's not a safe environment.
wait, so you're writing on the premise that based on a paragraph of information, there is an absolute right answer to that,
Right.
because there's not. depending on how you define these labels.
Right. Oh my God.
Now, I'm not going to say something completely out of whack, like it's conduct disorder or something,
Yeah.
but you can make an argument for a lot of different labels here. And certainly you understand these labels they're constructs.
And
It's in the eye of the beholder,
Right.
people. But these people, psychologists, they're just, not all, but many are just like, there is a discrete label for this. And if you don't agree, you're not a competent clinician.
And it occurs to me that the professor, instead of being like, well, now hold on, like moderating the conversation a little bit, because that wasn't a useful comment.
Right. Yeah. So let's say I am wrong, which is fine.
Yeah.
He could have been like, well, okay, don't ridicule people,
Right.
classmate. Tell me where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I hear where you're coming from, but that's not the way I see that label. And that probably isn't the way most of us see that label.
Right.
So you can continue to see it that way, but that's not the way most clinicians define borderline.
Actually, what a great teaching moment that would have been in either case.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was...
Whether you're right or you're wrong, it doesn't matter. It's a great teaching moment about the process, the discussion about
Right.
it.
Yeah. I'm a student
Yeah.
in a class, and I'm offering an opinion in a vignette
Yeah.
that doesn't matter.
That reminds me of in Harry Potter when what's the Trelawney, Professor Trelawney. She's the divinations professor, and Hermione totally looks down on this because it's a funny thing, because even though in this world, in this fictional world, magic is absolutely a thing, divinations is seen kind of like astrology for magic. Like, yeah, well, that's not real, but everything else is real. So they're in the class, and I think Harry or someone I think it's Harry. Oh no, Hermione. Hermione interprets whatever, the tea leaves or whatever, and the professor's like, "Oh no, that's a terrible interpretation." Like that kind of thing. Like, how could you think that interpretation? As if it's this perfect science that you can only interpret it in one way.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. And as a teacher, it's funny because as a student, so I was a professor for a long time, and then I went back to get my doctorate.
Uh-huh.
And one of the main things I learned in getting my doctorate was how not to be a professor. Because as a student, I would watch, I could tell you stories of my doctorate classes of some of the most just uneducational experiences, aside from learning what not to do as a professor, i.e., don't ridicule your students.
Yeah.
Don't make them feel like shit for trying to it wasn't like I raised my hand and I was just like, I know the answer,
Right.
Or everyone else listen to me.
Right, right.
I just was like, I was actually, normally I wouldn't participate because I'm just kind of shy in classes. I was just like, well, okay, I'll try to be a part of the crowd this time,
Right.
Anyway, last question here. What is Umberto, what is your actual dream job?
My actual dream job?
Famous patron Lyndon wants to know.
Okay, that one actually I can answer. I want to create specifically, I'm writing a book. I like writing songs. I like making entertainment experiences like games and things like that. So I suppose if for the rest of my life I could work in my little workshop and make things out of my brain, they're my inventions, and put them out for the world, kind of like what we're doing here, I'd be happy.
Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining us out there. Please take care of yourself because
You deserve it.